Hello, thank you for stopping by my YouTube channel. My name is John Francis, and this is episode 3 in a series of many episodes. And the title for this episode is Third Heaven Reality Disclosure. Third Heaven Reality Disclosure. That's a lot to unpack, but we're going to do it. 2,000 years ago, there were prophecies that there would come a time on earth when many secrets would be revealed. Actually, in some places it says all secrets will be revealed. Hidden wisdom will be revealed. And are we in those times? I think so. If you look at the last 80 years on planet Earth, there have been remarkable revelations. Right after World War II, ancient scrolls were discovered. The Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Scrolls, revealing ancient secrets. There have been archaeological discoveries of ancient civilizations and their wisdom. In more recent times, we've seen a veil being lifted between the physical world and the next dimension. Some call it the astral plane, or the physical, or the psychic plane. This has occurred by near-death experiences. People have come back from near-death experiences and reported what they've experienced on the other side. There are also psychics who claim to be in mental contact with beings on other dimensions and report back information about what's on that level, other levels, and so forth. We've also seen, since the end of the last war, the appearance in the sky of mysterious objects, call them UFOs or UAPs, and many have interpreted those objects as beings from another world visiting Earth. Could it be true? Well, this would be we're living in a time of revelation, so certainly a revelation that we are not alone and that other intelligences exist in the universe. This would be a profound revelation, an amazing revelation. And so there are those who feel this has occurred already, and governments have been in contact with such beings, and some are even clamoring for an official disclosure. By disclosure, they mean governments coming forward and saying they've been in contact, or there really are extraterrestrial beings visiting Earth. And some even hope that doing this will bring about world peace, because supposedly those beings will have advanced technology, so-called free energy, which could end all conflicts on Earth. However, I don't really believe that, because I think the conflicts we see on Earth are rooted far deeper than just wars over resources. They goes much deeper. That might be a conversation for another time. But even as remarkable as such a revelation would be, that we have been visited by other beings, it would be really very superficial compared to another more profound disclosure. And that would be the disclosure of a totally different reality beyond the physical and beyond the psychic or astral realm. So what I will call the divine realm. That would be the ultimate revelation, because it would indicate to us where we truly came from, why we are here, why conditions on Earth are the way they are, and how perhaps one could even return to that realm. So there are many questions that will be opened up when such a revelation occurs. However, I don't believe it's going to really occur from official channels. because such a revelation would be very disabling to certain belief systems, and it would be a threat to those who rely upon those belief systems in an authoritarian way. But so it's going to this reality disclosure is going to come by other means, individually to individuals one at a time, and then maybe collectively in larger numbers simultaneously. That will be the direct reality disclosure. It's actually happening now. Individuals are having experiences in meditation, and they're having contacts with this divine reality. St. Paul in the Bible says he was taken up to the third heaven. That's 2,000 years ago. The third heaven we'll discuss right now. He had a revelation of reality, true reality, not the shadow world we live in now. And in episode 1, I touched briefly upon an experience that I had in 1975 one day, and that involved a movement up out of the physical body into the astral body, astral plane, psychic plane, and then up to the entrance to the third heaven. Now, I will do some explaining, and perhaps in the course of these many episodes on this channel, we'll go into more detail about my experience and so forth, but I don't want to overwhelm the viewer right now. I think setting some background would be very helpful, and a gradual revelation of ultimate reality would be best, rather than to try to force it all at once. After all, it has to come from within anyway. Just someone talking about it is not going to be the same as having the direct experience oneself. So, what is this third heaven? Well, if there's a third heaven, there must be a first heaven and a second heaven, right? Well, very good. You get an A for thinking that. Well, let's look at the ancients. The ancients looked up in the sky and they saw the birds flying there, and that's what they called the first heaven. You know, we take it for granted, but it was kind of mysterious to see how these birds could fly up there, to them anyway. So that was the first heaven. Then at night they looked up and they saw the stars. And the stars, they thought, were in another dimension beyond our atmosphere, beyond the physical. And, they thought that's what they were seeing when they were looking at stars. But we know right now that the stars are part of the physical universe. They're part of the same physical universe that our atmosphere is, where the birds are flying. It's just far away. But anyway, that's how we have first and second heavens. And eventually the mystics informed the general population that, no, the second heaven is not just something a little far away than the atmosphere. It's actually another dimension. So it's called the astral dimension. Astral stands for stars, and that's how it got to be second dimension. Second heaven got to be called the astral plane, or the psychic. We'll be discussing this a little bit more. Then you have the third heaven. And the third heaven is, or the divine realm. That is what I believe Jesus was speaking about when he talked about the kingdom of heaven. And he said, my kingdom is not of this world. It was beyond the physical. It is the eternal realm. And eternal means beyond time. So it's beyond space and time, beyond physicality, beyond even the psychic. The psychic in many ways is very similar to the physical. When a person dies and drops the physical body, they find themselves in another body in the psychic plane. You could call it the soul body. And oftentimes the experience is so similar to Earth that they're not even sure, they don't even know they've passed on. So, but the third heaven is a very, very different realm to the physical. My experience was I was positioned to the entrance to the third heaven. I was lifted up, and I could sense into the third heaven. And what I felt was that all the beings there were illuminated from the inside out. While on our physical earth, our light comes from an external source, the sun, or a light bulb, or something like that. But every being there was illuminated from the inside out by a light. It was actually the same light shining in every different being. And this light was not just, illuminating a darkness. It was actually sustaining, and it was actually who the beings are. They are emanations of light. This light, esoteric teachings call the central sun. It's one sun shining many different beings. You can think of it as a hologram, where each individual light is made in the image and likeness of the one central sun. And this concept of the central sun is extremely important for understanding the human condition. Why is there suffering on the physical? And also there's suffering on the psychic realm, the second heaven. There's still suffering. There are very negative beings, very negative realms that are there, and one can experience those. So one is not out of the woods yet at the second level, second heaven. And of course, the second heaven can influence events on earth. As St. Paul said, we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with the archons, the rulers and high levels. He means the second heaven. They can influence activities on earth and inspire humans, if you want to call it inspire, it's more like manipulate, humans to do horrendous things, to create mass suffering in wars and so forth. And so a true revelation would be a revelation of the third heaven, of reality, but it would be a revelation of really what's going on in the second heaven, the positive and negative forces that influence earth. And ultimately it would be a revelation of how one can move from the first heaven to the second heaven and then to the third heaven. Anyone who's had a glimpse of the third heaven or was really inspired by someone who did or read about it in a scripture, that would be the orienting goal of their whole life. As Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of heaven and all things shall be added unto you, because that's the solution of all our problems. Jesus also said, if thine eye be single, thy body shall be full of light. That was just not about being enlightened in some intellectual sense, but it means body and soul. And when you have this light in you, the more light you have in the body and soul, the less influenced we are by the forces of the first and second heaven, and the more we are in line with the central sun or heaven. And ultimately, when one has enough light in the physical body and in the soul, one can gain entrance to the third heaven, which is the kingdom of God. Now, there's a whole science of how one can get a body full of light. And that's going to be the topics that we're going to discuss in subsequent videos. Actually, one of the themes of this YouTube channel is that Jesus taught the way to the third heaven through a series of parables, cryptic sayings that only those with eyes to see and ears to hear could understand. And then privately, Jesus explained it to his disciples, because certain knowledge along those lines, if they're misused or misinterpreted, could result in very serious negative consequences for individuals and for groups of individuals. Now, some of you, the inquiring minds, may be thinking, well, why are there three heavens? That's a good question, right? Why are there three heavens? Why isn't just one heaven that's, where there's no suffering and there's communion with God and all is love and light and peace? Why are there the other so-called heavens, the physical and the psychic? And there are different theories about that. And the first theory is you can get from the Bible, and you can come up with an idea that in addition to the third heaven, that God created earth, first and second heaven, and it was perfect as it could be. There wasn't any suffering, although it wasn't quite as ecstatic as the third heaven. But then Adam and Eve ate from a tree that they weren't supposed to eat from, and God got very angry and decided to curse the first and second heavens of his creation, and threw Adam and Eve out, and they suffered there. And not only were Adam and Eve punished, but all generations, millions and billions of people, are being incarnated into a world of suffering, the first and second heavens, and apparently being punished because of what Adam did. Now Adam and Eve did. We're actually going to explore what that really means, what the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil means. Eventually we'll do that in other episodes. We might even touch it tonight, I'm not sure, or right now. Then there's the second theory that said God allowed Satan or a devil or some negative force to infiltrate his perfect creation, and when he infiltrated, he tempted Adam and Eve to disobey God and eat from that tree. And you could say again that God got angry and punished, and so forth. But there's the idea that there was an infiltrator that corrupted things. Then there is the third theory that this tree of the knowledge of good and evil actually represents the human nervous system. The human nervous system looks like a tree. And in this human nervous system, in more modern language, you could think of it as a virtual reality suit. So Adam and Eve got tempted to take a little bite, so to speak, of an experience with this virtual reality suit, and that plunged them into a world that a simulation of virtual reality created by this being who wanted to play God. He wanted to have his own little world. It was not a world where the divine light, the divine sun, the inner sun of God shines, but it's a world, like images on a screen. How do you create images on the screen? At least in the old motion picture film days, you basically light goes through film, and the film filters, or you could say blocks the light and creates different images, different colors and images on the screen. And that's basically what Plato taught. He had what's called the allegory of Plato's cave, that there's a group of people in a cave and they're chained to the floor and they're watching images on the cave wall that are being cast by blocking light from a light source, a candle, and so forth inside the cave. And so they think they're looking at reality when actually they're just looking at shadows. And you have hints of this in the Bible. I think it was St. Paul who said, "We look through a glass darkly now, but in the days to come we will see the light clearly." So that's another point of view, 3 of them. And so in this third scenario, Adam and Eve are not kicked out of heaven, and God is not punishing them in these worlds because they disobeyed, but they've fallen in, they were tempted to enter into a world which was fundamentally dualistic. It has good things in this world, pleasurable, beautiful things, which are essentially counterfeits of the good, the true good in the third heaven. And then, in some strange way, what we would call negativity or evil, suffering, ugliness, are inversions of corresponding good, the beauty and so forth, and peace and love in heaven. They're just inversions of that. So it's a pseudo simulation of counterfeit good and counterfeit inverse of good on this plane. Maybe we'll discuss this a little later on. If people have comments, questions, put that in the section there. I should mention that my email address is innersonscommunion@gmail.com, innersonscommunion@gmail.com, if people have questions or want to discuss this. But we're going to go into this a lot in other videos. It's a very deep subject, but it's extremely relevant to the times in which we live. Now, why is that? Because if we're on the verge, or if it's happening now, in fact, if we're becoming in contact with intelligences from beyond the human level, either from another physical planet, more technologically advanced, but not necessarily morally or spiritually advanced, but anyway, if they're from another physical world, that should be taken into consideration because they may have the same limitations that we do. Then they could be coming from the psychic realm. And in the psychic realm, just like in the physical realm, you have those that are benevolent and those that are really not serving the essential sun, but they're serving that which obstructs the central sun, that force which does the obstruction. God apparently has allowed that because we experience it, and also it does not in any way harm or detract from what is going on in the third heaven. So there's no permanent damage. And so one could call the third heaven reality, and that which is a simulation or a shadow of that, that's not reality. That's just however you want to call it, a counterfeit or simulation. So that's just giving you some things to meditate on and contemplate. So in future upcoming videos, we'll get into details about how one actually has a body full of light, how one gets a soul full of light, how one moves. When one drops the physical body, one doesn't automatically go to the third heaven, unless you're totally enlightened. So one has to have a physical body enlightened, and then the soul body enlightened. And when we have reached total enlightenment of the soul, then an ascension into the third heaven can take place. But while we're on earth and we have a physical body, by working to enlighten the physical body, we're also enlightening our soul body. So that's the work to be done now. Because the light will come from the center of your being, the mustard seed, and to get to the physical, it has to come through the soul. So when you enlighten the physical body, you're also enlightening the soul body. So when you then drop the physical body, you will find that you already you've been doing work on your soul body, and it's quite enlightened if your physical body has become quite enlightened. And then you continue on that level to enlighten more the soul body. To go into more detail now would not really be appropriate now, because then we have to get into a much longer conversation. And I think the topics we're discussing, like today, are very deep and profound and challenging. And so it's best to take them in small little bits where you can consider them inwardly. I don't expect anyone on this channel to ever accept anything they hear or believe anything just because it's coming from me. That's for sure. You don't want to do that. But it has to ultimately come, or any really external authority figure, it has to come ultimately from the central sun itself. The central sun itself. And you may be wondering why there's this cross hanging. That's actually a symbol that's associated with the central sun. Because I will be presenting later that in my understanding, Christ is an emanation of the central sun. He's the Son of God, and we normally spell it S-O-N, but he's also a manifestation of the Son of God, as the Son of God, S-U-N. And he says he comes from the Father, he comes from above. The Father and I are one. Because in a holographic sense, each individual light, the one light shines in many different individual beings in a holograph. And then Jesus also said, I am the vine and you are the branches. Why did he say that? Well, if you know something about fractal geometry, every branch in some ways looks like the tree, shaped like the tree, or a bush. So there's some ideas to ponder. And when Jesus said, Christ said, first of all, Christ is, if you can understand Christ as essential Son, and Jesus is the embodiment of that, and he came to earth so that we might have inner communion with the central Sun. And so to get to know the loving nature of the central Sun, then this is done more easily by making contact with a being who's in tune with that central Sun. And Jesus also says something. He says, I am in you and you are in me. And the Father is in me and I am in the Father. Well, that sounds kind of... If we're talking about something physical, how could that be? How could you say, for example, I am in my automobile, sitting in my automobile, and my automobile is in me? Well, physically, you can't have something in you and then at the same time be in it. Unless you're talking about light or a fractal or a hologram. Because you can imagine, I think, that you have a light shining from the center of your chest, from your physical, spiritual, your spiritual heart, that is shining, and you could look at it and say, well, that light is in me. But if you let the light shine even more, it could extend out beyond you and create maybe an aura or expand out and touch other people. And then it would be reasonable to say, oh, I am also in that light that's expanding out. So the light within you is all, and you are also in that light. So I think this is some way of looking at it. I think we've covered quite a bit today, a lot more than I intended to do. Got carried away there. Sorry. But we have, all the parables are going to be very, very interesting. I'm just setting the foundation now for things to happen for you to understand things that are happening in the world and the crossroads that we're at, and decisions that are to be made, and how one can return to the light if one feels so inspired. I believe in the second episode we discussed a prodigal son, I believe, and that's related to this topic also. Okay, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at innersuncommunion at gmail.com, innersuncommunion at gmail.com, or leave a comment in the comment section below. You could also hit the like button if you like it, or the no button if you don't like it. Either way, it's okay if you press my buttons. The good one or the bad one. That's fine. At least I know you're there. You didn't fall asleep. If you want to sign up for the YouTube notification, do that and click the bell and make sure the bell shines so you get notified of everything if you want to be. And I'll notify you too if you email me. Okay, I hope you're having a nice day and a blessed day. And we'll see you again next time for episode number 4.